Hello, everyone. It is Debbie DeGroat. Welcome to our webinar today. If you were with us last week, you know that I had a little surgery on a vocal cord, so my voice is a little weird, but it's actually a little better this week. So hopefully it's going to get better every week. So thank you for putting up with me because we have a really awesome topic today. It's actually one of my very favorites. So we're going to talk about managing seller expectations. So Gio, thank you for typing hello in the chat box. I was just going to ask you all to do that. And in fact, I wish we could just be in a room together because I would love to hear your challenges around this topic. So if you'd like, go ahead and take a moment and maybe type in the chat box where you're stuck in having price adjustment conversations, dealing with sellers who are unhappy because they don't have enough showings or multiple bids. So at the end of the webinar, I'm going to go to the chat box and I'm going to make sure that I answer all of your questions, okay? But thank you. I mean, we had a huge group registered for today, so I know it's a very hot topic. And isn't it strange how the market twists and turns? Just a few months ago, everything was flying off the shelf, even in the ultra luxury price point. And then suddenly, not in all markets, but in some markets and some pockets, it really slowed down. And now we're starting to see months of inventory. We're starting to see one or two price adjustments needed. And I know that some of you have not been in real estate in a time where you had to manage these sellers' expectations. So you got to learn. And some of the rest of us might actually be a little bit rusty. So I have lots of great stuff for you today. Included, we have a new negotiation masterclass series that my partners in our Built How events put together with me for all of you. So this is our gift. Nothing to buy, no strings attached. And I'll tell you why we put this together at this time. Because with all of the changes coming in August, with all of the rules the rules of the game changing around commissions and working with our buyers and sellers, we thought this would be an awesome time for you to beef up the fine art of negotiation. So all you have to do is scan that QR code. You are going to have access to our portal. It's going to give you 12 sessions. You can hop around. You can watch them as often as you choose, and it's going to give you some great resources. So this is absolutely free to you. And also, in the 12 weeks, you'll also have an additional 45 days to stay in that portal, just in case you have a vacation or something comes up and you need to take a little bit longer. So have fun with it. I guess the only string attached, I would love to hear your feedback. What were your takeaways? What are you implementing? That would be super fun for me. So if we haven't met before, my name is Debbie DeGroat. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forward Coaching. I started my real estate career at the age of 18. And that very first year, interest rates went from, I think they were right about 9%, and they went to 18%. So suddenly, it became very hard to get listings sold. Then again, in the early 90s, then again in 2008. So I have spent a good portion of my career working in markets where it was tough to get those listings sold, where the skill of being able to negotiate and manage these seller expectations absolutely critical, because If you didn't have that skill, your listings expired. So here's something I also discovered, and this is probably what some of you are living through in this very moment. I discovered that whenever there's any type of a shift in the market, it seems like the buyers get it right away, but the sellers want to deny it. Have you noticed that? It's like the stages of grieving. It's like denial is one of those first stages, like it's not happening. This can't be happening. How did I miss my perfect window? And then it's like the next stage is anger. Well, can't be my fault. Can't be the property. Must be you, my agent. You're not doing all you should be doing for me. Now, once we get past that, the future sellers, they kind of get it. It's still work to work with them and reduce their properties if needed, but you're kind of in that messy middle where some of your sellers, they can't believe that they need a price adjustment, right? So we're going to talk about that today. So the market in some price points has calmed a bit in some areas, and certain first-time buyer price points, they're still kind of flying off the shelf. Definitely, though, in certain pockets and in the luxury. So there may be a few less showings in some of those price points, a few less offers, which is very common. I'm seeing that a lot, and a few more days on market. And see, the thing about days on market is, I think logically, our sellers probably know that days on market are visible in the multiple listing, but they're not actually thinking about that. So that's why we need to point out to them, Mr. Seller, I get it. You're not in a big hurry to sell. But here's the thing. Everyone can see those days on market in the multiple listing. And we're coming out of a market where everything sold quickly. So now, if they see 30, 60 plus days on market, what do they think? They think something's wrong with the property. How come nobody else wants it? Maybe the seller's desperate now. I can make a low offer. Or maybe the seller is difficult to work with. So days on market are not our friend. So that's why we want to point that out to them and just remind them that that's very visible to the world. Now, some properties are now going to require at least one or two price adjustments. There's lots of stuff we learned the hard way. What I learned the hard way years ago is that doing small price reductions and going back often to the seller did not work. Because first of all, the small reductions did not impact the market, didn't get the buyer's interest up, but also it's sort of like, how they say, pull the Band-Aid off quickly? So I was like torturing my seller by going back for one more and one more and one more. And often I noticed that about 3 price reductions in, they wanted to get rid of me, right? Because they were just over it. So I realized I really need to be strategic in the amount of reduction and when I do that reduction, because possibly they're not going to give me more than 1 or 2. Okay. And some are requiring 2. Now, have you noticed that if there's a reason that's a common one that deals are falling apart, it's over request for repairs? Because see, buyers are like, wait, prices are high, rates are high, paying a lot for this property. I want these repairs done. Now, granted, again, In those super hot price points, hot markets, there's those few pockets where they'll still buy as is. They'll waive inspections. So I get it. Some of that is going on. But in a lot of the price points and markets, buyers are much more demanding. Sellers, on the other hand, they don't want to acknowledge that anything has changed because they are in denial. So, is this our market for the rest of the year? I don't know. We all have our thoughts. We read everything we read. What I'm hearing now is rates potentially are going to drop some in September. The problem with real estate is no one has a crystal ball. In fact, I was on a few months ago with our Goldman Sachs advisors, and I asked them, they were telling us what they thought would happen in the market. And I asked them, are you sure? And he laughed at me and he said, Debbie, if we were sure, we'd all be so rich, we wouldn't be here. So, see, my advice always to my sellers was, we don't have a crystal ball. The real estate market is like the stock market. It can change every day. All we know is what we know in this moment. All we know is who are we competing against here in your local market? How many buyers are purchasing in this price point? And in terms of the lineup in your competition, how do you rank in that lineup? So I can't promise you or them that this is the market for the rest of the year. No one has that crystal ball. But as those days on market stack up, that could be the kiss of death for them to achieve top sales price. So that's exactly why I would often counsel my sellers that at the 2-week mark, we're going to examine the activity. If we have no offers, if showings are low, that might be our moment to make that adjustment. But certainly no longer than 21 days. Because ideally, if we could sell your property inside of that 30-day window, the odds of you getting a higher price are likely, right? So, but here's the danger zone. And by the way, I see a couple questions. Absolutely, guys, we are recording this. And so you will get a copy of this. And also, I'm going to come back to the chat box. So I'm not going to miss any of your good thoughts here. But I know some of you probably have appointments. So I'm going to get through our content. Then I'm going to go over to the chat box. All right, so here's where you got to be careful. And I'm going to share with you the mistake I made. So in the early 90s, market here in California, very tough, hard to sell properties, tons of inventory. So nothing like what we have now, really, really, really tough. And I decided I am going to be like just so clear, and I'm not going to take any overpriced listing. So I started going into these appointments very strong. This is what the home is worth. Can't be a penny over this. This is what you need to do. And my listing taken ratio went from over 90% down to 48%. I started losing lots of listings. So then I started to study the ones that I lost. And I noticed that they did ultimately sell. Now, there were a couple of price adjustments, but they ultimately sold. And I thought, whoa, I think they feel like I'm coming in like the angel of death, like they want to shoot the messenger. They don't like the information. I have to change my approach. So this is a tricky one, but this is very important. So if there's only one takeaway from the webinar today, this would be the one I would want for you to have. Navigate these conversations carefully, right? See, they don't want you to align yourself with the data. They want you to align yourself with them. They don't want you to come in the door negative like the angel of death. They want you to be excited about the property. They want you to be a champion for their property. So, do we need to give them the factual data? Absolutely. Do we need to answer their questions truthfully? Absolutely. Just be careful how you proceed, as listings are still precious and hard to come by. And you know what? You're probably going to have to take some that are overpriced, and you're going to have to work them. You know, it was not uncommon in markets that I've sold in, and some of you have had this experience too, where days on market were 6 months, 4 months, 5 months. But we got really spoiled. We think 5 weeks is a long time. So you're going to have to adjust some things that you do, which is one of them is seller communication. Because we haven't been having to do a lot of that in reporting back. But if we don't do that now, they'll probably cancel the listing. So just accept the fact you're going to have to take some overpriced listings and show the seller the data. You know, I always like to ask the seller as I'm booking the appointment on the phone, Mr. Seller, tell me, did you have a price in mind? Now, sometimes they would tell me that they did, and they would tell me what it was. Sometimes they would say, I'm not sure. Sometimes they would say, well, that's your job. You tell me. And I say, okay, that's great. Whatever they said. Okay, absolutely. We'll talk about it when we get together. Because, guys, let's face it, you know, they've already gone on Zillow and they've done their estimate. They might have looked at realtor.com or whatever portal. Maybe they're getting some market report that's being sent to them. Most of them have already made up their mind. Now, this is very different from markets in the past, where agents were the gatekeepers to the information. It is so public and so prevalent. Most sellers are doing their due diligence, deciding on their price, and you're going to maybe have just a little influence to sway them. So as I'm sitting there going through the data, there's a few things that I want to be aware of. One thing, kind of simple, but pretty important, I don't say your home comps to your neighbor. I don't use that word because you know why? What do they always say? No, it doesn't. My house is better. My house is bigger. So I just eliminate the word comp. Instead, I say, let's review the data that your buyers will be reviewing when they make a decision to purchase your home. And I go through that data without a lot of drama, just very factual. And then I ask them, based on the data, where do you feel you would like to begin? Now, you might be saying, okay, but what if they want a crazy high price? Well, now I'm going to have to use my professional expertise to negotiate that with them, to talk to them about that. If the price is fine, great, we agree. Let's move forward. But I always want to know, what are they thinking? Let's go to the data. Based on the data, where should we begin? And I also like to offer the 3 pricing strategies. So I say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we have 3 strategies we can consider. Strategy number one, I call it less is more. So we price below the data, which many of you have used this strategy very successfully. We price below the data, sparks a frenzy, multiple bids, potentially driving the price up. Strategy number two, pricing to the data. We know it will create a faster sale and we'll be able to get a full value appraisal. Strategy number three, I call it retail pricing. We go as high as we think that ceiling might be. We press on that ceiling. We test the market knowing that an adjustment might be required. And let them know that you'll fight for them. See, what words we don't want to say is we can try it, because they don't like that, right? Instead, I like to say, we are partners now. I benefit if the house sells for more because you'll like me better, you'll give me referrals, and I earn a higher commission. So I'm going to do everything to make you happy. I am going to fight for this price. So don't say we can try it, because to them, what that translates into is they're going to make a half-hearted effort and then come back to me for a reduction. So be factual, be upbeat, and enthusiastic. Remember, you are their champion. Okay, but what if you have to take it overpriced? Well, first thing I would say is make sure it's a good business decision. So if you take something that's never going to sell, it's never going to sell, why would I take it? Well, I might take it if I thought I want to break into this neighborhood. It will give me something to hold open. I can market around it. Maybe. But pretty much this decision has to be based on, I know what I'm investing in terms of time and energy. Am I going to get a return for my investment? So when I was in that dark moment of being too strict, turning away too many listings, dropping down to that only 48% listing taken ratio, I decided I had to create some standards that if I was going to be willing to take a listing at a price higher than I wanted to take it, I had to hold myself accountable not to go too crazy, if that makes sense. So one step, time over motivation. So maybe in this moment, they're not hyper motivated. However, I know that by the end of the year, they have to be in their new destination. So in other words, I can see a real motivation. They might just have a little bit of time, which is causing them to reach for a higher price. So I want to measure motivation. Then I want to take a look at, are these reasonable people? You guys know what I mean. There are some of those clients that are so aggressive, so almost just mean, and they're calling you 2 and 3 and 4 times a day, and they're yelling at you, and they're calling you at midnight, and you're like, wow, maybe I could deal with this for a couple of weeks, but I can't deal with this for months. So I like to ask myself, if I'm going to take it higher, it's going to take some time. Can I deal with these people? Then you have to look at property and location. We've kind of come out of this market where, it could be backing to the prison and facing the junior high, and it's sold in 2 days. But as soon as the market changes, as soon as there's more inventory option, you'll notice that location issues become much more pronounced. Buyers are much more cautious, and it's not as easy to get the higher value. So when I say decent property, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily dead sharp, but it doesn't have the highway behind or some goofy, strange floor plan. You guys know there are some of those properties that are just so hideous that the only way you'll take them is if it's a bargain price that's going to blow that property right out, because otherwise it's going to sit forever. So that was another standard. Then I felt that to keep myself accountable, not to take crazy overpriced listings, I needed to set a limit. So if I knew that the data indicated a price of X, then how far above that am I willing to go? And if it's more than that, I'm going to say no, thank you. Now, in that time in the market, I decided my margin was 10%. So let's say a property is 500,000. That's where I think it should be listed. I'm not going to list it for more than 550, right? So you guys decide based on your market, what's that limit? And then it's time to take longer listings. You know, things were selling so fast. We haven't even talked about this for a very long time, but you're going to want to take at least a 6-month just to be safe. And on a luxury property, probably 12 months. When I used to explain this to sellers and they'd say, well, gosh, I don't want it to take 6 months to sell my house, I would say, well, you know, Mr. Seller, I don't anticipate that it will. However, we want to take time to do an incredible pre-launch. We want to find the ideal buyer for your home. We need to get you safely through to the closing. And this just allows enough time inside of that window for all of that to happen. Now, once in a while, if a seller really pushed back on a longer listing, I might do something like every 45 days, they have the option to cancel if they're not satisfied with my performance. But I very seldom took anything less than a 6-month listing. So there's the biggie. Improve your seller communication plan. You know, some of you might actually have your home up for sale right now. So if you do, you know what I mean. You know how your seller, they drive home, they pull up in their driveway, they see that for sale sign sitting there in their yard. Nobody has shown their house for a week, no offers. Their neighbors are asking, hey, have you sold your house yet? It feels like such a rejection. And if they're not talking to you, if they're not getting reports about the actions, activity, and the things that you're doing, you know what? They're going to assume you're doing nothing, and they're going to get mad. And if they're the ones that are always reaching out, chasing you, they're going to get mad. So I want you to really take a minute today. Think about your seller communication plan. What works well for many of my clients is they set a time and a day every week, and that is their time to call their sellers. My time and day was always Tuesdays between 1:30 and 3. Because you see, I wanted to take Monday to talk to any agents, any activity from the weekend. Tuesday was a good day because the sellers were anxious to talk to me, and I could share with them, this is my plan for the rest of the week. This is what I'm going to be doing. Now, on top of that, many of your CRMs have great reports that you can generate, things that you can send to them. You might want to pull MLS data to send to them, but put together a plan. Automated texting, but also including those actual conversations. And what I've learned the hard way too is that if you have two owners of a property, sometimes what happens is you end up only speaking to one owner, and all of that great data and explanation and information that you're sharing doesn't get transferred over to that other owner. Instead, they just hang up the phone and say, Debbie said we should drop the price. And the other owner says, no way. So when you're having a true heart to heart on price adjustment, get them in your office if you can. Home court advantage makes a difference. Get them both on a Zoom. Go and sit with them because that's important. You know, there's something, I might have it in the slide, that I read recently. It was called Ideal Service Scenario. And it said, tell your seller, these are the things I do to stay in touch. This is the frequency of when I call and contact you. Is that enough for you? For you to feel, wow, at the end of this transaction, that this was 5-star. What do you need from me? And someone said to me, but what if they say, I want you to call me 3 times a day? Well, you probably need to know that that's who they are, right? So that you can manage that expectation. But let's ask them, how often do you need to hear from me? What's your best method of communication? What do you need to see that will help you understand I'm working hard for you? So improve your seller communication. And then also, I think it's good to look to reduce your upfront costs to market, actually should say, to market your listings. Because, I'll write myself a note to fix that later. Because if they're harder to sell, you could end up with a lot of money that's out there and they haven't closed. And pretty soon you're in debt, especially on the luxury properties. So on luxury properties, it is not unusual to set your budget. And then if the seller is demanding things that are way above budget, for you to say, Mr. Seller, I'm happy to do that for you. However, that exceeds my budget and you would need to pay for that. And if and when the property sells, I would be happy to credit that back to you in the commission. So be careful, because sometimes, especially in luxury, they want a lot of stuff and it's sexy and it costs big bucks. And then lo and behold, they don't get the price they want and they decide to take the house off the market. So we got to do what we've got to do to get the listings, but be careful. So I want you to look at your costs, analyze that, and see if there's something you can reduce. A great agent here in Huntington Beach, Sean Stanfield, coached Sean for about, him and his team about 10 years. And he just has some great strategies in tougher markets dealing with his sellers, where he would say, Mr. Seller, if you choose the price and I don't agree with that price, then you're going to need to pay some of the upfront marketing. If you allow me to choose the price, I will pay for it, right? So gave them options. All right, so let's say we've done all of this. Now you've got a signed listing in your hand. Don't rush out the door. Instead, take another 20 minutes to set the expectation and to really set the stage for how you're going to work together. So the expectation setting conversation, it's interesting that once they've hired you, they actually listen better. The relationship has now shifted. You're their wise advisor. So I've taken that listing, I have possession of it. And I say, so Mr. Seller, now that we've made the decision to work together, let's talk about what you can expect over the next few weeks. You see, I realize that a few months ago, homes in this neighborhood were selling in 2 or 3 days. However, now that's not happening. So you're not going to have the frenzy. You're not going to have massive amount of showings. Open houses may be a little bit quieter. So the market has calmed a bit. So please don't compare it to when your neighbor sold 4 months ago. This is a different environment. Now, I cannot promise you that the house will sell for the price you've chosen. But what I can promise you is that I'm going to do everything in my power to fight for you and to sell the house at the highest realistic price possible. And then I'm going to talk about my communication plan, right? So I'm going to reset their thoughts about the market, tell them what to expect, potentially how many showings. In a luxury resort market property, they might be lucky to have one showing a week. So thinking about your market, helping to prepare them, and then telling them, this is how we're going to stay in touch. This is how we're going to communicate. So we actually put together a little setting expectation conversation script. So that's a free gift for you. You don't even have to request it. When we send you the recording, I'm going to send you that script just to make it easy for you to implement that. Okay. Now, you've got the listing in your hand. Should you do a net sheet? If you choose to do a net sheet, always do it at a lower price. Never do it at the asking price. So here's how I would set up the net sheet. I would say, Mrs. Seller, let's do this. Let me do a net sheet for you, showing you what the net proceeds would be. And I'm going to take a number that I feel might be the worst case scenario of where an offer might come in. So I'm just going to use 500. Let's pretend it's 500. And I'm going to say, let's take a look at what would the net be if an offer came in at 450. Well, I wouldn't take 450. Oh, no, I get it. I'm not saying that you would. That potentially could be where our offers start. And I want to give you a baseline. I want to give you some numbers so that you can then calculate in your mind, if an offer came in at 450, where would you counter propose? So see, I like to get that net sheet at a much lower number, because what actually happens is it kind of prepares their mind for a potentially lower number. And that net is the number they remember. I'm not saying they're going to take it, but it's so much better because if you do it at asking price, that's what they've locked on, right? That's the net figure. And then if you can, while you're there with them, set a timeline for that first adjustment. Now, this is especially important if you really feel you had to go quite a bit over what you wanted to take that listing for. That's when we would have that conversation that days on market, transparent for all. Days on market are not our friend. So, Mr. Seller, in 2 weeks, we need to have our first conversation, and ideally no later than 21 days from that, or 21 days total, we should do the first adjustment. Now, if possible, if they're very receptive and willing, and they will pre-sign the adjustment so that that becomes automatic 21 days in, that's great. That makes your job easier. So we're going to share a communication plan. We're going to ask them to describe their ideal service scenario. We're going to let them know you can't promise you can sell it for what they want, but you promise to put in over the top effort, and that you promise to keep them informed every step of the way. We all know they like seller feedback, kind of, right? They like seller feedback when it's positive. And yet that negative feedback is what they need to hear to make decisions, to make an adjustment. It might be a good idea to say to them in this 20 minutes, right, as we're setting expectations, do I have your permission to give you unfiltered, direct, and honest feedback as I receive it? And say, sometimes it's not fun, right? Because we all love our homes and think they're perfect. And a buyer may pick at it a bit. And yet I feel I owe it to you to respect you enough to always tell you the truth. So now let's say you have to deliver some feedback that's not pleasant. Then you say, you gave me permission, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the direct feedback, and do it without drama, right, guys? Just say it. They need to hear it. And I think of it as you're the doctor, they're the patient, and sometimes the doctor has to give the patient bad news. But it is the doctor's ethical duty to tell the patient the truth. And sometimes the patient doesn't listen. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he said to me, I'll have people come to me and I'll say, you know what, if you don't stop smoking, your emphysema is so bad. If you don't stop smoking, you're going to be dead before the end of the year. And they say, okay, yeah, fine, doc. And then they come back 90 days later, more sick, and they didn't stop smoking. And the doctor says, if you don't stop smoking, you're going to be dead. And then they don't stop smoking. See, the reason I bring that up, you cannot want to achieve this outcome more than they do. So while we want to be very diligent, hardworking, honest, do our best, we also have to detach just a bit from that ultimate outcome, because we don't have all the power. They have the power. They have to choose to take your advice. And it's very normal as an agent. We've all done this. I feel guilty. I feel so guilty because they really need to sell and their home hasn't sold. Or, gosh, what else can I do? What else can I do? Really, at a certain point, you've done it all. Exposure is a given. The entire world has access to their property, and they're not choosing it, which means we need to adjust the price. So you're the doctor, they're the patient. Sometimes they won't listen. But when I think of my responsibility, if I'm going to keep that listing, then I have to keep telling them what they need to do until they either listen or they fire me or the listing expires, right? I got to do it. I also like to talk to them about online viewings as online previews. Well, we've only had 3 people look at our home. You're right. We've only had 3 physical showings. However, there's been 3,452 online previews. So almost 3,500 people saw your home. Only 3 chose to look at it, and none of them chose to buy it. So at this point, the market is rejecting us. And see, I always use us and we because I want them to feel I'm aligned with them. So at this moment, the market is rejecting us. And now we have to make a choice, a decision on adjusting the price. Now, as you're updating them each week and you're telling them what you're doing to get it sold, sometimes you run out of things to say. Am I right? So try to have a theme. Maybe it's reporting how many new listings are on the market. Maybe it's this week is giving them feedback. Maybe this is the time to talk about price adjustment. But have a theme, have a plan for that conversation, and always have a plan to tell them these are 2 or 3 additional things I'm going to be doing this week. Because see, they want you to be proactive, right? So share all feedback, ask permission to be direct, and even reminding them that we are back to a market where it's highly possible that that first offer might be their best. And then remind them also, as part of this setting expectation, that when the buyer does their home inspection and they come back with a list of repairs, that we want to be cautious about turning that down. Because 40 to 50% of the deals that are currently falling apart, Mr. Seller, it's because the seller would not complete the repairs. So kind of new mind shift for them. And I skipped over that and I don't want to screw up by going backwards. There we go. Don't apologize. It's not your fault. You don't control the market. You didn't tell them to paint their house purple. You didn't tell them to buy a house that backs to the freeway. You don't control any of that. What you really have the great ability to do is help guide them to see the truth, to see the logic, to understand the market, and make the decisions that are right for them. So if you go into those seller conversations apologetic, on the defensive, feeling weak, they're going to eat you alive. But when you go in confident and calm, well, you haven't shown any buyers my house. You're right. I haven't. And it's interesting because I prospect diligently every day. I've contacted all the homeowners locally to see who they might know. I've reached out to everyone in my database. And at this current price, no one is interested in viewing it. And that's exactly why we need to have the conversation today about making that adjustment. So don't apologize, don't weaken, be strong and proactive. Tell them what they need to do. You cannot control the market, and you're going to need to brush up on those negotiation skills because you are going to need them. But that's great because we got that course for you. So that's totally going to help you. And as their advisor, don't be afraid to say, this is what we need to do next. And again, circling back, be careful about those little price adjustments. You know, a favorite thing of mine to use is years ago, there was a NAR report, and it's still very applicable today. It said that if a property has a few showings and no offers, statistically, it's at least 5% too high. And that if it has nothing, it's dead in the water. Statistically, it's at least 10% too high. So Mr. Seller, based on that report and the fact that we've had no viewings, that tells us that we ideally need to make a 10% adjustment. I know it's a lot, guys, but if you make these small adjustments, it will not do you service or your seller. So ask for 5, don't take less than 3. Ask for 10, don't take less than 7. And again, don't be afraid to say, this is what we need to do next. And Lisa Lloyd, she's such a great agent, such a nice lady, and really, I think, struggled with being direct. Some of you might feel the same way, like, I don't want to offend my seller. I don't want to be too strong. But when you think about, I am their wise advisor, I owe it to them. Boris Kolodov, great client. In fact, I just heard from Boris the other day from Portugal. Boris earns $2 million a year selling luxury properties. And a lot of the time, what we spend our coaching time over the years doing is strategizing the right words, the right approach. Boris is very analytical, and at times that didn't always fit his clients. So we'd have to revamp some of those words. But I'm going to teach you the stuff that I taught Lisa, that I taught Boris in that negotiations course. Now, in just a second, we're going to jump to the chat box. So I just want to make sure you're not confused. When you join the webinar today, we will automatically send you the recording. We will automatically send you the link for the free complimentary negotiations course. And we will automatically send you the setting expectation script for your sellers. So you don't have to lift a finger. Just watch your email that's coming your way. Now, if you're at a point where you say, okay, second half, game on, I need a coach. I want to talk to Debbie about what it's like to work with Forward. Then you scan this QR code. So this is a complimentary strategy session for those who are considering that this might be the right time to hire a coach to take their business to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me about that, you go right ahead and scan that code. Okay, so let me go back to the chat box here. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any important questions. Jenna, you're asking about last week's webinar. You can just email me, Debbie@forwardcoaching.com. Okay, and just say, send me last week's recording. All right. By the way, guys, I love to have you here live because I know that when you listen to a recording, sometimes you mean to listen and you forget to listen and you don't listen. But just in case, if you ever think, wow, that's a topic that is so important to me and I can't make Debbie's webinar, go ahead and register, okay? Because that's going to automatically trigger that result of a recording coming your way, okay? So Philip says, high expectations before the home is going on the market, and that he struggles with having those conversations in the future. You know what, guys? It's not easy. It's never easy to deliver what they view as bad news. But you know what? I promise you that you'll get used to it. I promise you that if you embrace it, those weekly conversations, that it gets easier. I was talking to an awesome client of ours, Jeff Yarborough, last week, fabulous agent in Beverly Hills. And he was talking about a few of his luxury listings that were just not getting showings. And Jeff, is he's like such a pro, I don't know, 25, 30 years in the business, but he wasn't looking forward to those conversations. But he said, wow, it was actually kind of easy. I called them and they said yes, almost like they've been waiting for me to ask. So I get it. It's not easy, but it is a skill that you will develop if you work on it. Let's see, Ronaldo says confusion in the market, all the new buyer agreements, the interest rates, the political stuff, the perfect storm, all of this going crazy. Yeah, you're right. That's when people need to know you care. That's when they really need a wise advisor. So, and that negotiations course, when you go through it, you're going to see that it's not about being some gimmicky, hardcore, beat them into submission. It's really about collaboration. It's really about meeting people where they're at and asking those great questions to figure out their true motivation, right? Let's see, great takeaways, awesome. The 3 strategies. So Sal, it's less is more, price below where the market is, less is more, spark multiple bids and a frenzy, price to the market data, which will allow us to justify our price easily, get a full value appraisal, and potentially sell pretty quickly. The ultimate or the other is retail pricing. Kind of a lot of them want that, which is pressing the ceiling on the market, testing the market. So less is more, price to the data, or retail pricing. And yeah, you're right. Long Beach market is crazy. That's why I said definitely certain pockets, right? And price points. But I think it's just good to be ready, to be prepared. So let's see if I missed anything else. How do we get a seller on board with a price? Let's see, buyers willing to pay now. Yeah, so interpreting that, basically, you got a stubborn seller, right? They won't listen. They want a price from 2 years ago. But see, that's where you have to go back and say, is this a high maintenance, low profit situation? What is their motivation? How do I use that to help them make this decision? As an agent, have I done everything I can? Have I provided the proper data, the proper information? Have I told them clearly and fearlessly, this is what needs to happen? And if I have done all of that and they absolutely will not listen, then I have a choice. I could say to them, I would like to give your listing back because you are not doing what I'm asking you to do. Your property's not going to sell at this price. I need to give it back to you. Or you keep it and you continue to work it. And who knows, sometimes you get surprised and they do sell. But again, I'd be careful if they're really hard to deal with because they could really wear you out. Yeah, I don't like to do the net sheet until we've selected a listing price. And then I like to do the net sheet below that price. Okay. Let's see, small price reductions. Yep, like 1,000 paper cuts. You are right. In this market, is it better to ask for a price adjustment or promote incentives like a 3-2-1 buy down? I think that depends a bit on the price point and what your buyer needs might be. So, and if you ever did offer that incentive and that did not work for you, you can always go back to the seller and say, let's remove the incentive and adjust the price. So yeah, that's going to be, I think these concessions, after August are going to be even more valuable. That's going to be a very integral part of all of this. Hey, Robert, buyer lost job, even stagnant long days on market. Yeah, sometimes that happens. And, then you think, well, do we take it off the market? give it some time, put it back, just reduce it and sell it, because I think in most MLSs, they're going to be able to go back in the archives and see all of that info. I don't have a copy of that NAR report, the 5 and 10%. You might Google it and find it. I kind of doubt it because I think it was about 20 years ago, but it definitely applies. Okay. All right, guys, I think we got most of the big questions answered. So I really appreciate you being with us today. We would love to help you go to your next level of success. Our clients often see as much as 50% improvement in their first year with us, and we really care about all of you. So have a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.